helping students and healthcare professionals not just survive, but thrive with a purpose. This is the CMDA Student Pulse podcast with your host, Bill Reichart, National Director of CMDA Campus Ministries.
Well, welcome to another episode of CMDA's Student Pulse podcast. I'm Bill Reichart, National Director for Campus and Community Ministries here at CMDA. And my guest today is Tyson Langhofer. Tyson is the Director of the Center for Academic Freedom for Alliance Defending Freedom. And Tyson, before we get into our conversation, let me just give our listeners and those who are watching a quick bio. Tyson earned his JD at Regent University School of Law in 1999, graduating cum laude. Tyson serves as, again, the Senior Counsel and Director of the Center for Academic Freedom for ADF, and has been a guest or written pieces for numerous major media outlets, including the Washington Post and Washington Times, USA Today, Town Hall, The Federalist, and the Daily Wire. Well, thank you, Tyson, for joining us. And I guess you can now add the Student Pulse podcast to that list of media outlets and such. Thank you for being a part of this, our podcast, and having this conversation together.
Absolutely. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're going to dive right into the issues before us, and they have to do with freedom on our medical and dental school campuses. Why don't we just help our listeners understand what are the First Amendment rights does a student at a public university possess fundamentally?
Yeah, so there's a number of principles surrounding the rights of students on campus. But in general, the Supreme Court has made it very clear that students at public universities and public schools don't shed their constitutional rights when they step onto the campus or when they step through the schoolhouse gates. So they maintain their First Amendment rights. But they do have different rights. The rights do vary depending on the setting. So let me talk first about the broader outdoor areas of campus, your sidewalks and your grassy areas and things like that. In those areas, those are generally considered public forums. And in public forums, the government cannot restrict your rights to speak, and except with reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. But they can't say, I don't like what you're going to say, therefore you can't say it. But they could say, hey, you can't stand outside the dorms at 3 a.m. with a bullhorn. That would be a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction. You can't block ingress and egress to buildings. That would be a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction. You can't destroy any property. Again, a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction. But when you're out on the public sidewalks and grassy areas, you have the right to share the gospel. You have the right to express your political opinions. You have the right to discuss controversial matters. And the school can't tell you, hey, you can't do that without our permission, or you can only do that in this little area over here, these speech zones. And we can talk about the types of policies maybe that universities try to implement in order to restrict speech. But in general, that's your rights outdoors. Now, indoors, in classrooms, when you're in class, school has a greater right to restrict your speech because that's not a public forum. It's not designed for the public to come in and express their viewpoints, right? That is designed for a very specific function, which is to deliver academic content for the people that have paid for that content. So you couldn't tell a professor, hey, by the way, I'd like to express my opinion on immigration today, right? In your biology class. That's not the forum for which that is designed. So you have restricted rights in there. But if the professor says, hey, we're going to write a speech on anything you want to write on, and you say, I'd like to share about my faith in Jesus, he couldn't say, well, you can't do that because you can't talk about religion, but you can talk about everything else. That would be a content-based restriction or a viewpoint-based restriction. And even in a closed forum, they don't have the ability to say, you can't do that if they open the forum up for people to express their opinions.
That's very helpful. Before we dive into some of the ways that a school or university might restrict those rights, we should qualify the things we're talking about. We're talking about public institutions, and so there are going to be medical students, dental students that are in private institutions. Where do these boundaries differ?
Sure, yeah, that's a great point. So the First Amendment only restricts the government. The First Amendment says that the government may not restrict your First Amendment rights. And public universities and public schools are government entities, therefore they are restricted by that. Conversely, private institutions are actually protected by the First Amendment. Many private religious institutions say that we want to establish a religious institution to further our religious beliefs and to develop students that have those beliefs, and therefore they have the right to set restrictions on student speech that maybe a public institution would not. So the First Amendment and all the principles we're going to talk about today do not apply to the private schools. Now, there may be some contractual things or some policies that private institutions have that you could look to say, hey, you said in your policy that you would give me the right to speak, but now you're telling me I cannot. You're applying this in a discriminatory manner according to your own policies, and you might have some policy remedy, but you would not have a First Amendment remedy for most private institutions.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, Tyson. Well, let's dive into some of the ways that a student might feel restricted. As you know, the things that we're seeing CMDA chapters gathering together on campus. Usually, the challenges are in their speech, or what they might say might be held to account by the school or university, or the leaders they want to put into place. Those who are part of their CMDA chapter, they are restricted, or they're prohibited from restricting the leadership to just Christians, those who would share the same beliefs and values. And so that has become a challenge for some of our student chapters. But in light of that, what are some of the things and the ways that schools and universities are putting some restrictions or attempting to restrict students' First Amendment rights?
So there's really four general types of policies that we typically see employed by schools that can vary in application but have general categories. The first, it would be a speech zone policy or a prior permit policy, and these apply usually in the outdoor areas of campus, and they essentially say, hey, you can't speak anywhere on campus unless you have a prior permit, or you only can speak in this speech zone with prior permission. And as I indicated, most public universities, their outdoor areas of campus are public forums, and typically the government cannot require prior permission before speaking in a public forum unless it's just a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction. So if a CMDA student wanted to go out and they wanted to promote an event that was happening, the CMDA was going to hold on campus. Generally, if there's just one student out there saying, hey, we're going to hold an event tomorrow night, you want to come to it? The school couldn't say, hey, you have to have prior permission before doing this, and you got to have 3 days notice and all that stuff. That would be a prior restraint, which would be unconstitutional. So if they try to restrict your speech on, just a general couple students out speaking on a sidewalk, typically they can't do that. That would be something they couldn't do. A second way would be a speech code. And a speech code really doesn't, it doesn't say you have to have prior permission, but it regulates the content of what you're going to say. And typically these are in their non-discrimination policies, they'll say that you can't discriminate on certain bases: race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, the whole panoply of protected characteristics. And they'll apply that in a way to say, if you expressed your religious beliefs in a way that offended somebody, that somehow constituted a violation of the non-discrimination policy, and they apply it to restrict the content of your speech. The First Amendment is very clear that the government cannot restrict or target the content or viewpoint of somebody's speech. If they allow people to speak on a subject, they can't say, you can't express that viewpoint on that subject. So in general, if in class or in an assignment or at an event or elsewhere on campus, students at CMDA events or parts of that are Christians on campus, they can't be told you can't speak or express your opinion because it has simply offended somebody else. So that's a speech code. And then you have the student recognition policies, which you were discussing earlier, Bill, where you have a forum which is created where most universities say we're going to have these student groups, these recognized student groups, and they're going to get certain benefits, but you have to meet certain criteria in order to be a recognized student group. Most of them say that you have to sign the non-discrimination policy. And again, the non-discrimination policy says that the university may not discriminate on certain bases: race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity. And they apply that to student groups. Now, we think that that's wrong. We think that they can't even apply that to student groups because it's private action as opposed to government action. These are student groups that are private, and they're gathering together of their own accord, which they have the right to do. But even if it could apply, what they can't do is say, we're going to allow certain groups to organize around certain beliefs, but we're not going to allow you to organize around your religious beliefs and ensure that your leaders share those beliefs. That's unconstitutional. It violates their First Amendment rights. How can you ensure that you're going to be able to have a group which advocates for certain beliefs if you can't make sure that your leaders share those certain beliefs, right? It's
Exactly.
really pretty silly. It's very, very silly. It just doesn't make any sense. Most of these universities have between 100 and 600 different student groups with all variety of beliefs. And many of them have very exclusive type beliefs. And it's completely fine for a Jewish group to ensure that their leaders have Jewish beliefs, and a Muslim group share their Muslim beliefs, or a feminist group have feminists lead that group. There's nothing wrong with that. And so they can't do that. And so if you run into problems there, give us a call. We'd love to help you on that. Then finally, you have student fees. Most universities require their students to pay fees in addition to their tuition. And those fees go in part to support student groups to express certain opinions. And many times those are many thousands of dollars available to student groups, but many times they will be allocated by the student union on campus. And the student unions are very, very liberal. And many times they are denying the right of student groups to express pro-life or Christian or conservative viewpoints in an event that they want to be funded by student groups. That's unconstitutional as well. The Supreme Court held that if they have a student group, a mandatory student fee, they must allocate those fees in a viewpoint neutral manner. In other words, that they can't say, well, we don't like your viewpoint. On a pro-life viewpoint, we'll fund a pro-abortion viewpoint, but not a pro-life viewpoint. That would be viewpoint discrimination, and it's not allowed.
Stay with us. More Student Pulse podcast in just a moment.
So let's say a student or student group, a CMDA group, runs afoul of some of these potential issues that you just described. How should they respond? What? So oftentimes there's a lot of intimidation baked into this. It's a fear of getting in trouble in some way that's going to upend their medical career, their training, and so flying under the radar, trying to keep a low profile. It's easy for students to feel maybe intimidated quickly as they're maybe asked to go to the dean's office. We've seen that oftentimes, those conversations that students are a part of that often create a lot of anxiety and challenge. So let's say a student or student group is faced with these issues. What would be their first approach? What would be their first step in terms of addressing these issues as they would come up?
Well, I mean, the first approach is just to start a dialogue with whoever's in charge, whoever's making that decision. If it gets denied, don't just allow the denial to sit there. Just ask the questions. Ask questions. Mm-hmm. Hey, what policy did you apply? What was the basis? What evidence did you rely upon in applying that policy? Mm-hmm. Is this policy been applied this way in the past? And just engage in it. Give them the benefit of the doubt. but ask questions. Don't be afraid to question. And then to say, hey, I found this policy. It appears that we comply. I'm confused about why this was denied. And then try to gather information. And then if you can't, if you feel like after gathering that it wasn't applied correctly, then you can always reach out to us and say, at ADF and say, hey, here's what happened. What do you guys think? Is this an issue? ADF is a ministry where we do everything we do for free. It's pro bono. There's no charge to you. This is why we're here. You're not bothering us. This is why we're here. We want to help students like you bring the gospel to a very dark place, the universities where it's really needed. So reach out to us and we would evaluate it and say, yeah, you've got a claim here. And then we try to work with them where we help the students try to work it out directly. We try to not to get involved unless absolutely necessary. It's not our goal to create litigation. It's our goal to allow students to have the full benefit of their resources on campus and not be discriminated against because of their beliefs. And if we can do that through a simple email, then that's great. I don't want to complicate their life through a lawsuit. My goal is just to help them be able to most efficiently carry out the goals of their group.
Yeah, that's exactly what we've seen when rather than just recoil and step, and surrender in a sense, to kind of lean in with the curiosity that you spoke of, ask the good questions, just try to find out what the rationale and reason is for this particular issue or concern from the university. And then I think what you all are providing is just such an invaluable resource is the coaching, the coming alongside, the giving students an understanding of kind of where they stand in light of the situation as they describe it, and helping kind of walk them through that. So we're going to put your information and how they reach out on in our show notes and make sure that information is available. I know it's as simple as going to your website and just reaching out. You have a particular branch of the ADF that focuses on student work. Is that correct? Yeah.
Correct. So it's the Center for Academic Freedom. There's 7 attorneys and a couple legal assistants and some other people that all we do is represent students and faculty at public universities in order so that they can freely participate in the marketplace.
Yeah, you all have helped a bunch of our students and continue to do so, and it has been, like I said, an invaluable resource just to be able to have your expertise and understanding of these issues. Because for the most part, I think there's really very few new situations that you see. You probably see the same issues appearing again and again and again, just maybe repackaged a little differently. That's absolutely true. And let me give you your students some encouragement in a couple things. One, we have about a 91% success rate when we challenge these policies. What that tells you is that the law is still really strong. And we don't bring frivolous lawsuits. We don't try to create a controversy just to create a controversy. We do it when we know that there is a really strong claim. And so one, they can rest assured that we know what we're doing and that the law really does protect them. But secondly, there's really a biblical example. I mean, Paul was a Roman citizen, and when Paul his rights were violated, they tried to sweep it under the rug. And he said, no, I'm a Roman citizen and I want my right in front of, Caesar, right? And so there's nothing wrong with that. It's completely fine. And in fact, it's not only biblical, but it actually helps the next person down the road. That down the line, those other students that are coming after them, establishing that precedent to allow them to be able to continue the legacy of what they've started through CMDA.
Stay with us. More Student Pulse podcast in just a moment. To learn more about CMDA, download our CMDA Student Life app, available for Android and iPhone. The app will give you access to CMDA events, tools, Bible studies, and a wealth of other resources. Also, joining CMDA can be done on the app, and it only takes about 3 minutes to complete. As a student, CMDA will underwrite your membership so that you can join the community at no cost. Download the app today.
Well, we've kind of been talking about the defense, responding when a situation arises. Let's talk about the offense. What can we do proactively to create a culture of free speech? What are some steps we can take in that direction?
Yeah, it's a great question. As I indicated, the thing that encourages me about where we're at is that we're still winning these lawsuits and these challenges on a very, very successful basis. The problem is that we're winning in the law, but we're losing in the culture. I think obviously any student that's been on a public university campus for any period of time would know that there is a culture that does not respect the value of free speech. And everyone on both sides would say that they censor themselves for fear of what other people are going to think. And what I tell everybody, and this is a difficult thing, it's not easy. I'm not minimizing that. But what a principle that I always think about is this principle. It's that uniformity of thought breeds intolerance of disagreement. Uniformity of thought breeds intolerance of disagreement. You know why people react so viscerally to Orthodox Christian beliefs on campus? Is because they rarely hear it. They don't ever meet anybody that expresses it and expresses it in a winsome way, in a way that is inviting and actually with the ability to have a conversation. If more of our Christian brothers and sisters in Christ on campus express their beliefs in a winsome manner and a regular basis with evidence, I don't think that we would see such response, because they would say, oh, I know that person. They're a good person. They're very thoughtful. They're very intelligent. They're not hateful and bigoted. They're just sharing their Orthodox, deeply held beliefs. And so I think the way we create a better campus and society that is open to different beliefs is that we're willing to express those opinions, even when it's a little bit scary to do so. Because what I know is when my clients do that, they've had so many people come up to them quietly, usually, but say, hey, thanks for doing that. Hey, I appreciate that. I agree with you. I support you.
Oh, that's a good word. Well, we know in these days there are strong headwinds culturally against people of faith wanting to live out their faith in a real, winsome, practical way, and it's challenging, and it really is requiring almost the courage of a Daniel in these days to step out and step forward. But again, with a community of others around them, like CMDA, there's strength and support in the course of doing that. But then there are organizations like ADF that are also coming alongside to help encourage and admonish and just I think ignite and embolden that courage yet still more. And I'm just thankful for what you all are doing and the ways, again, that you've come alongside our students in those moments, because we don't, no student anticipates that they're going to have these kind of issues, concerns, and dust-ups. But when they happen, it's good to know that there's an organization like yourself who has years of experience walking these paths, understanding the issues, and seeing, like you just said, Tyson, the success in terms of the outcomes that you realize at the end. So, as we're kind of wrapping up our conversation, Tyson, anything you would leave students, anything that you would encourage or exhort them to, to consider, or ways that they can respond to the things that we just discussed?
Well, I think I'd leave them with this understanding that when they stand up, even if they're just expressing an opinion, or if they stand up for their rights, that they are having that their stand has a ripple effect on so many people that they will have no idea about. I've seen it time and time again for my clients, where people will come up to them and will say, man, your stance gave me the courage to take a stand. We say that courage begets courage. And I represented a client named Jack Denton at Florida State University, who was the Senate president, and he was removed for expressing his traditional Catholic beliefs in a Catholic group chat for the Catholic Student Union. And he was called into a meeting for 7 hours, a Zoom meeting, where hundreds of people came and just made awful comments to him about him simply because he expressed his Catholic beliefs. And he was able to share his in the way he responded to that. He made an impact. And I've had two people come up to me in the year and a half since I represented him who said, "Did you represent Jack Denton?" I said, "Yes." And one of them worked at Florida State and said, "After I saw that, I said, I will never raise another dime for Florida State." And she left her job and went and joined a conservative organization so she could become advocating for things that she really believed in. I had an attorney who came up to me and said, "Did you represent Jack?" I said, "Yes." He said, I was in the courtroom on the other side when you argued that. And he said, "I thought the whole time I'm on the wrong side of this." And he left that position and joined another place where he could advocate things that he believed in. So Jack's stand changed the trajectory of two people's lives because he had courage. And so I would just encourage the students, don't look at the short-term pain, because there will be some. There will be a cost. But I can guarantee you that the gains that come from standing for your beliefs, how God will use that, it will be far in excess of any cost that comes as a result of your stance.
It's a great word to end on. Thank you, Tyson. Thank you again for you and the work you and your colleagues do at ADF. And again, we're going to put the information as to where students can go to reach out to you all, and that information will be in our show notes. So again, Tyson Langhofer, thank you so much for being a part of CMDA's Student Pulse podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. CMDA's Student Pulse podcast is a production of the Christian Medical and Dental Associations. The opinions expressed by guests on this podcast are not necessarily endorsed by the organization. CMDA is non-partisan and does not endorse political parties or candidates for public office. The views expressed on Student Pulse podcast reflect judgments regarding principles and values held by CMDA and its members.